In real life, the Golden Girls were not as friendly as they seemed on TV. Betty made Bea mad by flirting with people in the crowd. Estelle Getty was scared she forgot what she was going to say. Bea was so mad that she wouldn't talk to Betty after she got an Emmy before anyone else. Bea used a very bad word to describe Betty, and the casting director heard her. You'll be shocked by what you learn about these TV grandmothers. First, let's talk about the four Golden Girls' pasts. Betty White started her work in radio right after high school, but in 1949, when she joined Hollywood on television, a new live TV show, everything changed. It ran for 5 hours a day, 7 days a week on KAC-TV in Los Angeles. It was hard work and nothing like anything else on TV. Betty used to co-host with a guy named Jarvis. He left in 1951, and for a short time she shared the screen with Eddie Albert. But soon Betty took over the show by herself. She was the first woman to ever host a talk show by herself. There were hours when she talked straight into the camera, making up stories, jokes, acts, and ultimately guests. Some people even say Betty might have been the first woman to ever be on TV. She sang songs from The Merry Widow on a test show in 1939 when she was still in high school. This was before TV was big. When Betty did it in 1952, it was unheard of. She helped start a TV production company when she was only 28 years old and still lived with her parents. It was called Bandandy Productions, which came from the name of her dog, Bandit. It began with her, writer George Tibbles, and director Don Fedderson. Once upon a time, most TV shows were run by men. Betty was one of the first women in the USA to own a film company with someone else. She was in charge of what happened both in front of and behind the camera. Life with Elizabeth was their first big project. From 1953 to 1955, it ran across the country as a full-on sitcom. It began as a short sketch on her talk show. Betty not only starred in it, she also created it. She won an Emmy for the show in her home state in 1952. It changed history. She was the first woman to both write and star in her own show. A lot of people also liked seeing Betty on game shows. She was known for having a quick mind and great timing in the 1960s and 1970s. She has never been the host of Password. Alan Ludden, her husband, did, but she was a beloved friend who came often. Then, in 1983, she broke yet another rule. Betty was the first woman to win the Outstanding Game Show Host Daytime Emmy. She won for being the host of NBC's Just Men. People in the United States knew her from her appearances on game shows. They helped her become the warm and funny actress that people loved in her television parts. At the end of her life, Betty had won 7 Emmys over many decades, which is a very rare feat in TV. Betty got a special part in 1973 that changed her career for good. She played Sue Ann Nivens on an episode of The Mary Tyler Moore Show called The Lars Affair. Sue Ann was a happy TV housewife who was flirty and sharp as a knife behind closed doors. She wasn't meant to play that part. Since the story only asked for a Betty White type, the makers chose to ask the real Betty White. It took a while because she was close with Mary Tyler Moore at first, but Betty killed the part. Sue Ann was only meant to appear once, but people really liked her. She stayed on the show and won 2 Emmys in a row, in 1975 and 1976. She almost took that part with her to her next big job because it was so good. Betty was first chosen to play the flirty Blanche on The Golden Girls. Before she played Dorothy Zbornak, Bea Arthur was already a big name on Broadway. She had the part of Vera Charles in the show Mame with Angela Lansbury in 1966. Even though she wanted the lead part, she got the Tony Award for Best Featured Actress. She had already been in The Threepenny Opera and Fiddler on the Roof in 1964 as Yente the Matchmaker. During that show, she had a fight with the director, Jerome Robbins. She later said that he was the only person who had ever made her cry. In 1971, Norman Lear cast her as Maude Finley in an episode of All in the Family, which was her first job on TV. Because she was so well liked, CBS gave her her own show called Maude, which ran from 1972 to 1978. She became famous as a female TV star years before The Golden Girls started airing in 1985. She won an Emmy in 1977. When Rue McClanahan came to New York in 1957, she first worked as an actor in the theater. She finally went to Broadway in 1968 after more than 10 years in the show Jimmy Shine with Dustin Hoffman. The show had 161 performances and led to parts on TV. In the soap opera Another World, she played Caroline Johnson, a crazy maid. In Where the Heart Is, she played Margaret Jordan. When she joined Maude as B. Arthur's friend Vivian Harmon, her comedic skills stood out. That show brought the two actors together, which helped them work together on The Golden Girls. Rue got an Emmy in 1987 for her role as Blanche Devereaux, the flirty Southern girl. After decades of hard work in theater, she finally got ahead. The path to fame for Estelle Getty was also much longer. She tried to become an actress for 40 years before getting her big break at age 62. She played Dorothy's sassy mother, Sophia Petrillo. Her real-life age difference with B. Arthur was more than a year. However, she failed her first two auditions for The Golden Girls because producers thought she looked too young to play an 80-year-old woman. She wore old clothes to her third try and begged the makeup artist to make her look older. She told him, "This is just a job to you, but I view it as the end of my career unless you can make me look 80. She was determined, and it paid off. Her job at the time was to film the Torch Song trilogy in Los Angeles. Before this, she only had small film roles, like a short part in Tootsie, and worked in an office to support her family. A lot of people loved her as Sophia because she had great comedic timing and would say things like, "Your life's an open blouse" to Blanche. Sophia was only meant to be a small part of the show, but Getty won an Emmy in 1988 and became one of the fans' favorite stars. During an NBC advertising show in the fall of 1984, something funny took place. A play was being put on by Doris Roberts from Remington Steele and Selma Diamond from Night Court. During the joke, Diamond said, "Miami nice. It must be about a bunch of old people sitting around playing pinochle." This made everyone laugh. It was only a joke. But Warren Littlefield, one of the men in the room, saw more. He was Senior Vice President of Comedy Development at NBC and kept thinking about the idea of a show about older women. What happened after that casual statement was a surprise. Littlefield turned things around by writing the story himself instead of waiting for writers to bring it to him. His first stop was to writer Susan Harris, where he told her about the idea. Most TV shows don't have older women at the center, but Harris was interested. Matt Baumey, an author, would later call it one of the luckiest accidents in the history of TV. That joke turned into The Golden Girls, a show that won 11 Emmys and was nominated for 68 more. The plan to cast looked very different at first. Rue McClanahan was chosen to play Rose, the sweet and innocent Southern woman, and Betty White was chosen to play Blanche, the playful Southern woman. It made sense. White had played a similar part on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and McClanahan had played Maude's jolly Vivian. B. Arthur wasn't pleased, though. Arthur told Rue, "I don't want to do Maude and Vivian meet Sue Ann Nivens," when McClanahan called to tell her about the idea. Too dull. Things changed because Jay Sandrich, who directed the pilot for the show, made a smart choice. He asked McClanahan to read for Blanche instead of Rose during the auditions. After that, he had White read for Rose. Everything changed when that switch was turned on. Arthur agreed to join because he liked the new plan. The last-minute switch of roles made the show famous. Actresses got out of their old parts that stuck with them and made room for two memorable characters. The actress who played Sophia had her own story. Getty was younger than both White and Arthur, even though she played the oldest role. Every day she did 45 minutes of makeup to look the part. Making up her face didn't help her become Sophia, though. In the Los Angeles neighborhood of Fairfax, she went shopping before her interview to find things that would make her stand out. She then found a small wooden bag. She added it to Sophia's outfit because it looked great. Because it was so famous, the clothing department made a second one in case the first one got lost. Betty White talked about her ups and downs with her Golden Girls co-star Bea Arthur in an interview in 2011. Fans had been wondering about this for years, almost 20 years after the show stopped. Betty said, "She wasn't that fond of me. She found me a pain in the neck sometimes." Betty said that Bea didn't like how happy she was all the time. She laughed and said, "Sometimes if I was happy, she'd be mad." Some people were shocked because they thought Rose and Dorothy were just friends in the movie. But even though there was tension between them, they kept their cool. Neither of them let it get in the way of their playing, and they both got Emmys for their work on the show. The story took another turn. In a 2023 tell-all book, Joel Thurm, who worked at NBC as a casting director during the Golden Girls era, said something shocking. He said that he had heard Bea Arthur use a very rude and hurtful word to talk about Betty White. Rue McClanahan, who played Blanche, was also said to have said similar things, though later stories said Rue only called Betty a bit of a handful. Thurm thought the tension came from the fact that the women were so different as actors. As an actor who had studied in the theater, Bea was serious and needed time to get ready. Betty's style, on the other hand, was looser and less strict. She practiced differently than Bea did, and she liked talking to the audience between parts, which Bea didn't like. After many years, Bea's son Matthew Sachs had a different point of view. He said that his mom didn't dislike Betty in an interview. She just dealt with her in a difficult way. It was fun to have someone to be annoyed with, he noted. He said it was like the thought that everyone needs a neighbor who gets on their nerves. For Bea, Betty was that neighbor. Still, Matthew made it clear that his mother liked Betty in her own way, even though they had their ups and downs. In fact, in the early seasons of the show, she even took her for rides. A big difference in how people work was at the heart of it all. You had to stay in character and concentrate hard between takes on Broadway, where Bea came from. She used to be on live TV and game shows. It was normal for her to laugh with the crowd, flirt with them, and keep things light. Jim Colucci, who wrote a book about the show, said that during breaks, Betty would sometimes lift her skirt and joke with fans. It made Bea mad that people behaved that way. She stuck to her script right up until the last minute and took every performance very seriously. The group of the Golden Girls first showed signs of stress at the 1986 Emmy Awards. The four women were all up for Best Lead Actress in a Comedy Series. But the award went to Betty White. Bea Arthur didn't like that win. Rue McClanahan's autobiography says that Bea was very angry and even swore at Betty behind closed doors. Bea had always thought of herself as the serious actor who had been trained on stage. She didn't think much of Betty and thought of her as a game show host from when she was in Password. All four of them won Emmys in the end, Rue in 1987 and Bea and Estelle Getty in 1988. But some say Betty's early win caused a rift that never fully healed. The way they behaved didn't make things better. Right away, Betty would learn her lines by heart, and sometimes she would add jokes that the writers loved. She liked talking to the live crowd in between scenes, which made the set feel happy and light. Bea, on the other hand, didn't hand over her writing until the very end. She liked to stay in character, so between takes she would often go backstage to quiet down. Her son later explained that she just didn't think those breaks were the right time to socialize. Betty could do it without losing focus, but for Bea, it was distracting, and it annoyed her. Bea got more and more angry as the show went on. By the seventh season, she was tired of the jokes about her character Dorothy. The jokes about Dorothy often felt personal, unlike the jokes about Rose's stupidity, Blanche's love life, or Sophia's age. They poked fun at her looks, her voice, and her height. Bea thought that everyone was making fun of her, not just Dorothy. In fact, she asked the writers why they kept making Dorothy look ugly or weird. One reason she quit the show, even though it was still one of the most famous ones, was because she was so angry with the producers. NBC even tried to get Debbie Reynolds to appear in a test show, but Bea decided to stay for one more season before leaving for good. While Estelle Getty was having trouble with her lines, there was also a quiet sadness on the set. Estelle was younger than Bea, even though she played Sophia, Dorothy's mother. Around season 3, people began to notice that she was forgetting what she was going to say. At first, it was put on stress, but over time it got worse. Some say Betty made fun of Estelle for forgetting things in front of the real people there. Some people think Betty was trying to help by making people laugh to take their minds off of Estelle and give her time to recover. Estelle first wrote her lines on props, and then she switched to cue cards. On The Golden Girls, some cast members didn't always get along, but Betty White and Rue McClanahan became real friends and stayed friends for the whole 7 years the show was on. They both liked word games a lot and played them every day in between takes. Rue once said that there was always a game going on behind the scenes. During breaks from shooting, they would make each other little puzzles to solve. When they were done with work, they would exchange the puzzles. It wasn't just games that brought them together, though. She even told Rue when Mary Tyler Moore's brother had puppies because she knew Rue loved animals. Rue got her third dog because of that tip. Even though Bea Arthur didn't like it, Rue would sometimes talk to the crowd with Betty between scenes. It wasn't always easy behind the scenes, though. Rue said something surprising in an interview after the show. Bea Arthur wouldn't go to lunch unless Betty came too. Many people thought that Bea and Betty didn't get along, so this news shocked them. Bea would wait for Betty even if she was late so that the two of them could eat together. During filming weeks, they even sat next to each other at dinner on Friday nights. In her book, Betty said that they did have lunch together almost every day. It's odd because Bea was said to have found Betty's positive mood annoying, but it was clear that their friendship wasn't just a fight. There was a lot of stress, but there was also a kind of friendship going on. There was one more thing that made their relationship even stranger. Betty and Bea actually rode in the same car early in the show's run. In Los Angeles, they lived close to each other and sometimes rode to the NBC station in Burbank together. Around the year 1988, this stopped, and things between them began to get worse. One reason for the change could have been that Bea didn't like how Betty talked to the live crowd. People who knew them say that their different ways made things awkward. Betty liked to keep things light and connect with the crowd, while Bea was more serious and had studied theater. What began as a sensible way for co-stars to share a ride slowly fell apart as their differences grew. A lot of the time, Rue McClanahan was in the middle of everything. Bea and she had worked together before on Maude, and she was the one who got Bea to join the Golden Girls. In her book, Rue wrote an honest account of how Bea and Betty felt about each other. They were close, but not as close as she would have liked. It never got in the way of their work, though. Even when things weren't going well, Rue always tried to see the bright side of the group. She once said that even though there was stress behind the scenes, the set was still a happy place. She did say, though, that Bea was very mad when Betty got an Emmy before her in 1986. That moment seemed to bother Bea a lot. She was said to be very angry about it. To be fair, Rue's steady presence and the skill of everyone else kept the show going strong all the way to the end. On The Golden Girls, Estelle Getty played Sophia, who had a sharp tongue. She had a secret battle that ran through the whole show. People saw Getty as a confident and funny person, but behind the scenes, she was often scared. She was so scared of being on stage that it started the day before the movie. Rue McClanahan, who worked with her, once said you could see it in her like a dark cloud following her around. By the time they were ready to record, Getty would have grown distant and impossible to reach. She had been in plays before, including one that got good reviews called Torch Song Trilogy, but TV was different. The fast pace and live crowd were too much for her. She finally got to use cue cards in 1988 when things got really tough. She tried meditation, getting help, and practicing her line over and over again, even though that was usually seen as unprofessional, but nothing really helped. The show even paid someone to help her remember her lines at one time. The fear didn't go away. Getty was 62 years old when the show started in 1985, but her character Sophia was a lot older. A white wig, heavy makeup, thick glasses, and fake lines were part of her daily 45-minute makeover. A lot of her fans didn't even know her when she wasn't dressed up. In a strange twist, she was younger than Bea Arthur, who played her daughter on the show. When Getty's memory began to fade, she found ways to hide it. She wrote lines on things like her famous wicker bag and even made Sophia's mistakes part of her charm. Even when things were tough, her imagination kept her show going. Behind the scenes, though, things might feel alone. They asked Getty in 1987 if the group spent time together outside of work. Honestly, we all have such different lives, she said. I really want to hang out with them, but they won't let me. It was a sad look into how things work in real life. They were close friends on TV, but they weren't always that way in real life. During breaks, they would talk and laugh with each other. Some of the time, they would joke that they sounded like the Golden Girls, but Getty always felt left out. Getty had only started acting officially when she was 55, while her co-stars had been on TV for a long time. She looked up to the others and was a little scared by how much experience they had. They worked closely with the writers and helped shape the lines they wrote. That wasn't Getty. Because of her stress, she often asked for fewer words. She still really cared about them. Getty came to see Rue McClanahan appear in the Vagina Monologues in 2001 to cheer her on. She didn't want to let her friend down, even though her arm was broken. That quiet dedication told a lot about the person she was. In May 1992, Bea Arthur quit the Golden Girls after 7 very successful years. Because of that choice, the popular show came to an end. Jim Colucci's book, Golden Girls Forever, says that Arthur got more and more angry about how the writers made fun of her character, Dorothy. They often used her as a joke by calling her fat and ugly. Another thing that made the other women laugh was how weird their roles were. But Arthur took it personally. Her plans to not return for an 8th season were already set in stone by the time she turned 70 in early 1992. She told the directors that she thought the show was getting worse. It wasn't the first time she'd left in a bold way. She did the same thing with Maude many years ago. She quit while the show was still doing well. Matthew Sachs, her son, later told me that she thought the writers were running out of good ideas and that the amount of work was too much for someone her age. Arthur died in 2009, not long before he would have been 87 years old. NBC tried to keep the magic alive with a spin-off show called The Golden Palace after she left. Estelle Getty, Betty White, and Rue McClanahan all went back to their old parts, but this time their characters had bought a hotel. People didn't stay for the whole show, even though it started off strong with guest stars and Don Cheadle as the hotel boss. The show's ratings dropped quickly, and even though B. Arthur came back for 2 episodes, it wasn't able to get back on track. It was canceled after only 24 shows and 1 season, so a lot of plots were left unfinished. Something important was missing without Dorothy. In real life, the actors didn't look anything like the figures that fans loved. She said a lot of the time, none of us were like our characters. While Rose was nice and naive, White had a quick wit and a sharp mind, which made her think Betty White was the least like her part. Sophia had great timing, but Estelle Getty wasn't as brave. Getty really did have terrible stage fear. The day before the movie, she would get very nervous and often have trouble remembering her lines. Getty kept asking the cast if they could make the role Jewish, even though she played a strict Italian mom. She would have felt more at ease with it. Things were tense behind the scenes, even though the women looked close on TV. B. Arthur and Betty White had the most trouble with each other. A casting director named Joel Thurm said in a podcast from 2023 that Arthur had used very bad words to describe White. The son of Arthur said that his mom needed someone to be mad at all the time, and White became that person. The conflict may have begun because of the different ways they worked. Arthur thought it was rude and confusing for White to talk to people in the studio crowd between takes. There was also envy, especially after 1986 when White won the group's first Emmy. Later, McClanahan said Arthur was very sad and angry about it, even though they had worked together for years. Outside of work, the group didn't spend much time together. Even though she was upset, Arthur wouldn't go to lunch with White unless White decided to go with her. They spent most of their time together outside of movies and TV shows, at award shows and work events. The space between them made the love and laughter they made on screen stand out even more.